Carla, hey, good afternoon. It's so good to have you on our show today. Thank you for making time out of your day.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Thanks for having me. Excited to have this conversation.
I've been having a lot of conversations with, coaches and mindset coaches and speakers. And so I've really enjoyed it because personally, it's been awesome to get their perspective on life and what's going on and what they're seeing in the world. And I know that as a mindset coach, as a speaker, and also as a fellow podcaster, by the way, I love it. You've got a podcast called Differently, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
differently.
I just want to make sure I say that correctly. Um, I know that you're seeing what's going on just in the workforce. You're seeing what's going on in companies, what owners are dealing with and so forth. And so I'd love to really talk about just kind of what's going on in this, 2022. We're in the fourth quarter. I know a lot of us have seen some adjustments going on in the economy. We're dealing with inflation. We're dealing with high interest rates, a lot of uncertainty of what's going to happen in 2023. I'd love to know from your perspective, what's the overall, I guess, feeling of people in leadership positions? Oh, what do they feel right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, if I just think back to the last few weeks of calls with clients, I think there's some fear, there's some uncertainty, and that can really spiral, your motivation, your energy levels, your mood, everything pretty quickly. And my job as a coach is to really remind people. One is, what are the elements that you have control over and influence over in your life? Because those external factors are, it's kind of like a roller coaster. I mean, they're always going up and down. And if we live our life according to that, we're going to have a very certain kind of life that is feels like a roller coaster. And I think when we come back to what are the elements that are within our control to really influence, then we restore power within ourselves, right?
Mm,
Which feeling powerless and at the mercy of the economy or whatever it is feels terrible.
mhm. Yeah. When you when you're dealing with people, I think once again, you're a mindset coach. Maybe go a little bit granular on that. What does that mean to you? Because I think everybody, as a coach, everybody has kind of a different idea of what mindset means to them. But like in your expertise and what you work with people, what does that look like?
Yeah, so for me it's like let's address your thinking because it is one thing that you can control. It's with you 24/7. It's having a huge impact on the quality of your life and experience.
Hmm.
And let's really learn to one, understand it, bring a lot of awareness to what's happening there so that we can really learn to use it to our advantage to really innovate and be creative in our life so that we can impact the quality of our life, right? And so that looks like, I mean, when I work with somebody, it's first really just examining your thinking. And so I use journaling and writing as a core component to the work I do. And that's one way to kind of unpack what you're thinking.
Yeah.
With a coach, you can, kind of stand back and with somebody there by your side, really look at how is your thinking impacting your behaviors, your choices, your mood, your everything. And then start to challenge that. Because I think one of the greatest pieces of advice I ever received was don't believe everything you think.
Hmm.
And it really gave me freedom because I think as people, as humans, we relate to our thinking as though it's the truth. And those thoughts that have been around for years and years and years, sometimes where they're so familiar and so comfortable, we relate as though they are true. And
Yeah.
that has a huge impact on the way we show up and operate in our everyday life.
Hmm. Well, I think what you're kind of saying is a little bit of the ideas of limiting beliefs, and I'd love to know. I imagine that everybody that you deal with has an issue with limiting beliefs in their world. How do you deal with that? Like, how do you? And I guess I am asking personally because once again, we all have something that is holding us back. Maybe we haven't discovered it yet. We kind of maybe it's like it's so deep inside that we still haven't really pried enough to do that. How do you help your clients either discover it, either overcome it, and really break through those barriers, those walls, those ceilings that we put in our lives?
Yeah, so I've been coaching for over a decade. And when I first started coaching, I started to notice a pattern where I was helping people, but they would come into coaching and they would want to change something in their life. They want to change their relationship or their career, or they're stuck, or they want to move to a new city. They want to change something.
Mhm.
And I started to realize that how often in life do we go and change something, whether it's a relationship or a job, and it feels better for a little while, but then 3 months, 6 months in, you're like, you kind of feel like the same old thing, even though
Mhm.
you're in a new environment.
Yeah.
Well, I really started to notice that. And I started to ask my clients, like, what's the level of urgency for you to change this thing? And could we, if it's not that urgent, could we suspend it for a month or 2 months and
Mm.
let's explore something? And after doing a lot of that, I discovered what I call your survival model. And there's a literally a way of thinking, a way of behaving, and a way of showing up to your life that literally helped you to survive at one point in your life.
Mhm.
And most people today are still operating in that survival model. And they're trying to achieve this next level of their life or fulfillment or career,
Yeah.
but they're operating in this old model and they're just bumping their head up against the wall and they can't figure out why. And those limiting beliefs are tucked inside of this model. And a lot of times we can't see them ourselves. It's
Yeah.
like a blind spot.
Mhm.
And so that's the work I do through the writing and through a lot of conversation to uncover what is their survival model. And it's
Mm.
usually powered by one, two, or three really core ideas that you have about you and the world around you.
Mhm.
And without realizing it, we are living our life to either prove that wrong, avoid something from happening,
Yeah.
overcome something. And so it keeps us in this survival mode,
Yeah.
and we can't ever reach that level of like contentment and fulfillment.
I love it. Yeah, I love that you're talking about journaling because we know that as coaches and those that actually do love to journal, fear has no room on paper. Right? It just has no place on it because once you start to write it out, you're just going, "Am I really scared of that? Like, really? That's what I'm really?" Because in our mind, it's super scary, but when you actually visualize it, you write it down, you take the effort to do that. It's awesome to recognize that. Wow, that really isn't as scary as I thought it was. Right? So I think that's really brilliant that you do that. Um, so how did you get into coaching? I'm always intrigued by this because I think a lot of people that I've spoken to, myself included, sometimes there's a point where you don't feel like, ah, man, who wants to listen to me, or am I really can I really coach, right? Even though there is a strong desire, even though you do feel, I mean, at the end of the day, you are qualified to do it. What was it that was your trigger to help you get into this aspect of your life?
Yes. Can I go back to what you just said for just a moment and then I'll
Sure.
answer that question?
Yeah.
So, the fear, I just wanted to share because I just did this like 2 days ago. I had that negative voice in my head, telling me you can't, you won't, you shouldn't,
Hmm.
whatever, all that. And literally sat down and I'm like, okay, have your way. Like, just say everything terrible you've got to say about me, and then let's move on. Right.
Hmm.
And literally, like, there were like
Like, is this your inner
three,
critic that you're talking about?
yeah,
Okay.
totally. Yes.
Okay.
Inner saboteur, whatever you want to call it. Yes.
Mhm.
And so I started to dictate what it was telling me. And there were literally like three or five statements. And I'm like, that's it. That's all you got. Really? And I encourage anybody listening, like, really, sometimes it can feel so scary and big and disempowering, but it's not as large or big or scary as it seems. And so
Mhm.
if you give it voice, you'll realize it's really just a tiny little monster, not this big, huge monster.
Super good. That's great. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing.
Um, so yes, so how I got into this, I left corporate America after having my first son, and didn't know if I would go back, and had an opportunity to not go back and was thrilled. About 8 months into being a mom, I started to lose my own sanity and
Mhm.
realized like I needed a creative outlet. And
Mhm.
I saw so many moms around me that were honestly quite miserable and just surviving, and their mood and unhappiness would ripple to the way they parented their children. And
Mm,
I knew I didn't want that. And I felt myself slipping into that. And I felt this calling to write. And my mission was to try to figure out how to be a happy mom, because I
mm,
felt like if I could do that, that would be a really great gift I could give my children.
mhm,
And I started writing and writing, in the nooks and crannies of my life. And I don't know how long it was into that process, but I sat down on my bed one day. I was kind of reflecting back over my journal, and I was just stunned by what had happened on the pages of my journal. I was like, not only did I figure out how to take better care of myself so I could be a happy mom, but I had tapped into my spirituality and my creativity and peeled all these layers of self acceptance and so many things. And in that moment, I felt like God was telling me, like, you are here to teach people how to use the tool of writing to navigate their life. And
mm,
so I started a company called Sanity Journals, and I did that. I led small retreats and I self-published some guided journals, and I did that for a long period of time. And then a company reached out to me after I had done a speaking event, and they're like, "You love journaling and so do we." They were a coaching company that used journaling as a part of their process.
mhm.
Well, I ended up licensing their software and created an online journaling lounge, I called it, where people could
Wow.
write and connect and grow. And then I went to the president one day and I'm like, I really want to grow this business. I feel like I'm in my own way. Would you mentor me? And she said, I think you know what to do. I think you should go through our coaching. Well, that was
Mm,
the first time I really heard of coaching. I didn't even know what coaching was.
yeah.
And I went through the coaching, and the coaching was great, but I fell in love with the idea of taking a journal and coupling it with a coach to really help people change their lives. And so I ended up getting certified as a coach. So I always say coaching found me. I never really set out to be a coach.
That's awesome. That's great. Well, that's when you know you're really walking in your truth, when when it just hits you, and you maybe at first are like a
Yeah.
little bit resistant, and then it comes to that realization, like this is the avenue that I need to go down. So that's awesome. I'm kind of
Yeah.
curious now that you've opened that door with the journaling. Are there specific things that people are not doing correctly, that if they started to do this or started to ask these questions or started to write these types of things out, that they would be opening up and unlocking even the greater portion of themselves?
Yeah, I think, there's, I don't like to prescribe a right way to journal per se, but I think the pitfalls that people fall into are, writing and just kind of getting stuck in their negativity and just kind of stewing in that for too long. And so, one, it's really good to get out your thinking, like just emptying your thinking on a daily basis
Hmm.
is really healing.
Wow.
One, because you're just emptying it. And so when you empty it, there's new space for new thought and new idea. So I like to call it, taking out the mental trash, like just like we take out the trash in our home. How often do you take out your mental trash? Right. And if that were just a daily practice, that's really good. But the next level of it is really emptying it and then starting to look at it and say, is this thinking weighing me down, holding me back? Is it aligned with what I really want in my life and where I'm headed?
Hmm.
And start to challenge it, like, and sometimes this part can require a little bit of help,
Hmm.
but just having permission to say, challenge your thinking, is it old? Is it outdated? Does it need to go to Goodwill? Has it been hanging around for just way too long?
Yeah.
And then really start to think about, what is it you want for your life? What are your goals? And where is your thinking misaligned with that? Because, you know, if you think about, like, thoughts plus beliefs plus actions lead to our results. Most people, if they don't like the results they're getting in life, they go back one layer and kind of change their actions and habits and behaviors, right?
Hmm.
And they get a
Yeah.
little bit of traction, like that works. But if you don't go all the way back and address the thinking foundation, it's going to derail you over and over and over again. And so it's really hard to make traction, sustainable traction in your life without examining the thinking. So challenge the thinking, think about where it is you want to head, and then start to work to trade up your thinking just ever so slightly, like on a ladder,
Mhm. Okay.
to get closer and closer to align with where you're headed. I think positive thinking sometimes it wants to take you from the bottom rung of the ladder to the top, and it's not believable. It's hard to sustain. So
Sure.
I like the ladder approach, and a journal can be a great place to try that on.
So I'd like to go a little bit deeper on that. So when you said, because I'm really just I'm trying to visualize what it is that we would be writing down. I've heard of, doing the brain dump, but it seems like you're going a little bit more into like taking the trash out. What does that mean? I mean, so like at the end of the day, I'd write out, gosh dang it, had to, the hot water heater busted and now I have to drop $800 on that. And that was an unexpected expense. I had to have a really hard conversation with somebody that really sucked. I mean, like, what is it that when you're saying take the trash out, what are we writing out?
The thoughts that are persistent in your mind and kind of circling and stealing all your mental emotional energy.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense. And then so from there, then you look at you look at what you wrote down. And then are you saying stuff like, is this the truth? Or is this how you want the day to go? Or, I mean, like, how do you evaluate that correctly?
Yeah. So let's kind of take one. There's so many different ways to journal, but let's take one kind of example. So I have I think it's a 6-step process of like when you're grappling with something, like a decision you need to make.
Okay.
And so the first step would be to write down all your thought. Like what's the thing you're grappling with, first of all? What's all the thinking and the story that you're telling yourself about that challenge that you're grappling with?
Okay.
Then the third step is what's the untruth in what you're telling yourself? The fourth step is what's your ideal outcome in this
Mm.
particular scenario? The fifth, sixth, whatever I'm on is um, what actions would be aligned with that ideal outcome? And the last one is, what are you willing to do right here, now, today, tomorrow to take action on that?
Mm,
So
yeah.
it's kind of a process of like emptying the thinking, challenging the thinking,
Yeah.
identifying the ideal outcome, and then aligning yourself to that.
Love it. I think that's awesome. Where do you feel like people like stumble the biggest when it comes to that sequence of events?
Well, I think sometimes the challenging, like identifying the untruth that you're telling
Okay.
yourself, because people identify with their thinking as truth,
Yeah.
that
Yep.
can be really hard. And that's where it's really helpful to have a really solid friend or a coach or somebody in
Yeah.
your life to help you challenge that.
Mhm.
Um, I'll give you an example. I coached a woman years ago, and she was near retirement and wanted to, she wasn't spending her time the way she wanted to spend her time, and it was eating her up. And she was thinking, when she came into coaching, she's like, I'm just going to just help me get to retirement and then I'm going to live my life. And I told her, like, I'm not okay with that, because if I don't equip you to live your life here now, you'll get to retirement and you're just going to do the same crazy making in some other way or some other
Yeah.
venue. And you won't be able to do it then either if you don't know how to do it today. And
Yeah.
so, and that's one of my missions is don't put off your life,
Mm.
live it now. And so as we started to kind of pull back some of the thinking and things that you and I are talking about, we discovered that as a young girl, she had developed this over responsibility pattern in her life. I think she was the oldest. She took care of all the younger kids, and
Yeah.
she got a lot of accolades for that as a young girl. And she just had become like she's the one, right? She has that limiting belief, like, I have to be the one. And if I'm not, I'm going to let people down.
Yeah.
Well, when you hold a belief like that, it's so emotionally rooted and so important to her, it's really hard to change your behaviors. And as a coach, I could help her start to see, where that is debilitating, not only her, but her team, and
Yeah.
empowering her team so that she can eventually retire. And what we ended up doing was helping her start to change those behaviors right here and now so that she could elevate her team and start to live her life and spend time with her elderly mom and spend time with her teenage son and like do those things that were so important to her. So that's what it looks like.
That is so good. I feel like I got a little therapy myself right there. I'm the oldest of 6, and so I can definitely relate to this woman. We just had to
That's
let's
awesome.
just change the acronym to a male and or a Josh for that matter. So that was
Yeah.
really good. It's and it's so true though. And it is so it's so deep. And until you take time to invest in yourself, whether that's by going on to a retreat or and really a coach, just like you said, I think it's so important to involve somebody that is outside the fishbowl, somebody that can look and see like what is it you're really swimming in and how low is that water. And because as you're in it, you have no clue what's going on. And there's
That's
such
right.
value in that, right? So love what you're doing. You've got a great podcast differently. Talk to us about that. I know I'd love to get people to put that in their queue as well too, but give the audience a little bit of what you bring on your podcast.
Yeah, so it was really inspired by this idea that if you're willing to show up to the tiny moments of your life and do something slightly different, miracles happen. And
Mm,
I've seen it over and over and over again in my work. And so the podcast is really about inspiring that and showing you where those moments are in your life that you can start to make those different choices that
mm,
start to alter the course of your life. And instead of these big, overwhelming, swooping changes that you feel like you need to make in your life, you start in the little nooks and crannies, and those repeated over time end up really altering the course of your life.
yeah, yeah.
And you don't have to wait. It starts now.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. I love that. I know people are going to want to follow you as well too. Where can they continue to get inspired by you?
Yeah, so my website is carlareeves.com, and you can find me on Instagram and LinkedIn at Carla S. Reeves, and
Awesome.
it differently, the podcast.
Okay. Love it. Love it. Everybody, you got to sign up for the podcast, get that in your queue. We always need more inspiration. And we always also know we need to know too, like when are those little miracles going to happen in our life? Carla, as we kind of wrap up the show, first of all, thank you so much. This is wonderful. Thank you for going very granular into some of these ideas so that people have some practical application that they can put into their lives. I'd love for you to just kind of leave us with something inspirational to get people through that. Maybe they're having a hard day, maybe it's a hard week, maybe it's a hard year, and realizing that it's still the fourth quarter. There's still so much opportunity out there. But I'd love to have you close us out if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, I'll leave you with two things. One was a reminder that I give my clients all the time, but that I needed this last week too.
Yeah.
And it's just, I work with a lot of hyper achiever clients that are just, driven by achievement. And I kind of got back stuck in the vortex myself this last week and had to remind myself to release pressure and apply love. Because when we try to power through in that state of stress and overwhelm and anxiety, it just doesn't work and it feels terrible.
Yeah.
And if you can just take a moment to release pressure and apply love, amazing things happen. And then, secondly, I've been having some calls with people inside of a company, and we've just been taking 30 minutes to have a conversation about how they're spending their time. And I've had multiple people say, like, I haven't really stopped to lift my head to look at if the motions I'm making are leading to the life that I want to build.
Mm,
And so take a pause. We have a couple months left in the year and just look like what would feel really amazing to finish the year with, whether it's a feeling or one accomplishment you want to achieve or an experience you want to create with your family. And how can you align your thinking and your actions to really make that happen? Often it's not a huge thing. It's often the
yeah.
little things, right?
Yeah. So good. I feel like you've been in our office meetings here recently. We keep
Uh,
talking to our people about that. So I
it's
love
in
the
the air.
message. Yeah, I love the message, but it's so good, and I think it needs to be well repeated. And really appreciate you sharing that with us. So Carla, thank you so much. This has been an absolute pleasure having you on.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you for your podcast and the work you do in the world too.
Thank you. All right, you guys. Well, the price of admission on this podcast is to share it. And Carla gave you a few ideas of what you could do. Follow her on Instagram, of course, and then also put her podcast differently in your queue. And then also, as I know there's somebody out there that needs to hear this message. And so I just ask you to share it with them, give a little bit of Carla's inspiration into their lives and make an impact for them. So absolutely love you. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and we'll talk to you soon.